Despite what history told us, it shouldn't be shocking in the slightest the 2024 Philadelphia Eagles overcame the odds to win a championship. I'll tell you why on this Friday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. I'm your host, Louie DiBiase. Happy Parade Day. Happy Valentine's Day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 back in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. What an electric day in Center City, Philadelphia, on Broad Street, even in South Philly, starting at the sports complex at Lincoln Financial Field. The Eagles celebrated their Super Bowl 59 win today with the parade. I've got some parade moments I'm going to talk about later on in the show, but we continue to recap what the Eagles did last Sunday, which was stop history and at the same time make history. A championship season that stopped a three-peat, that took down one of the greatest dynasties in NFL history, one of the greatest players of all time in Patrick Mahomes, one of the greatest coaches of all time in Andy Reid. They did this. It's Friday, and it's starting to set in a little bit that they are champions. Like, the shock is starting to, the parade helped it, I think, resonate more and really settle in, but I'm still just loving diving into all the storylines of this championship season. And it's a season that, again, they stopped history when it comes to stopping the Kansas City Chiefs three-peat, but at the same time, they made history in a way, not by like breaking any records or being the first team to do this or that, which they are the first team to do a lot of things this year, right? And they did set the history books right in a lot of different ways. But one thing that really wasn't quantifiable, unless you really go through the history books of the NFL, that they did pull off this year was overcoming what happened in 2023. And I tend to roll my eyes like at the Rocky analogies in Philadelphia, but that line, that Jason Kelce used after they won the first Super Bowl in 2017 about it's not how hard you get hit, it's how you get up and keep moving forward. That really is this organization to a T. That was the theme of this team. I feel like that's been the theme of the Howie Roseman era. It's the Phoenixes rising through the ashes. And what they did this year, overcoming the 2023 collapse, that is something historic in its own right. Because when you look at the history of a team losing a Super Bowl, just in general, what happens the next few years? Normally it's not great. Normally they don't get back right away or within the next few years, and they definitely don't win a championship. Then if you look at the history books of a team that lost a championship in the dramatic fashion the Eagles did, and then follow it up with one of the worst collapses, maybe I think the worst collapse, a true contender that was 10-1 and had beaten so many good teams, including the reigning Super Bowl champions in Kansas City. They beat Josh Allen and the Bills. They beat Miami. They beat Dallas. They beat a lot of great teams that year, 10-1. To then collapse the way they did, like the NFL, I don't think has ever seen anything like that. And so Philadelphia, when you combine what happened in the Super Bowl 57 loss and then all of last year, they really did make history by winning a championship in 2024. Like, that just does not happen in the NFL. Most of the time, when an era of a certain team, a core, goes through that kind of stuff, it doesn't last much longer with that era, with that core. Like, I always think about the Legion of Boom in Seattle when they suffered that second loss to the New England Patriots after they won the Super Bowl the year before. They had a chance to repeat. The Malcolm Butler pick happens, and they just were never the same. You look at the Atlanta Falcons in 2016 after the Patriots had that historic comeback down 28-3 in the second half. The Atlanta Falcons were just never the same. And for the Eagles to do what they did this year, to win a championship after suffering two dramatic losses and collapses, is unbelievable. It really is historic. But at the same time, it shouldn't surprise you whatsoever, because that's who this team has been since Howie Roseman took back over in 2016 as the general manager. That's who they've been since Nick Sirianni became the head coach. And even during the Doug Peterson era, that's who they've been when Lane Johnson was on this team and Brandon Graham, and even when Jason Kelce and Fletcher Cox were still in Philly. That's who they've been with Jalen Hurts as their quarterback. Like, they are the Phoenixes rising through the ashes. So the fact that they overcame all that they did in a vacuum should blow your mind, because it hasn't been done before in NFL history. But considering the makeup of this football team, especially their big three pillars, Howie Roseman, Nick Sirianni, and Jalen Hurts, and heck, you could even say their owner, Jeffrey Louie, who's been a part of all of this as well and deserves a lot of credit for where the Eagles are today. If you look at the makeup of that core, all they've ever done is rise through the ashes. So it shouldn't surprise you in the slightest that this team did what they did this year. It shouldn't surprise you at all that this team, after being 2-2, and people were calling, including myself, were calling for the coach's job and potentially the quarterback's long-term future, that they rattled off 10 straight wins, which was a franchise record, only lost one more game along the way to win a Super Bowl. It's historically great and impressive and unique, but it's not that surprising when you look at Howie Roseman's track record of being demoted from general manager. Chip Kelly takes back over. Howie comes back in 2 years, builds a Super Bowl winner, and then it comes crashing down again in 2020. He has to rebuild this thing from the ashes yet again, and yet again only takes 2 more years to build another championship core, and it only takes 1 more year to win another Super Bowl. So Howie Roseman is the epitome of the Phoenix rising through the ashes. Nick Sirianni is too. He had a press conference that introduced him as the Eagles head coach, and everybody was already ready to fire him. Then they're 2-5, and they're like, oh, this is going to be a one-and-done head coach. People were already, after that Vegas loss in 2021, people were already starting to talk about who could be the head coach in 2022. And then the Flowers speech started. They win 7 of their last 9. They make the playoffs, and all he's ever done since is win, get to championships, and win a championship. He overcame this year, again, a 2-2 start where myself and a lot of people said he should be fired. He overcame a collapse last year that had his own organization, I think, at times, questioning his long-term future. Nick Sirianni overcame all of that. Jalen Hurts, I mean, do I even have to go through Jalen's story of coming up just short in the national championship against Deshaun Watson and Clemson, then getting benched in the national title the year later? You look at coming up just short to win the Heisman, losing to Joe Burrow in the college football playoff, losing to Patrick Mahomes, just short in the Super Bowl 2 years ago. Like, does it surprise you at all? They overcame historic odds and they beat the history books? It shouldn't. The Philadelphia Eagles of 2024 are the perfect representation of the analogy the Phoenix rises through the ashes. It really is, and again, I roll my eyes when I hear the Rocky analogies, but this team, even more so, you could say, than 2017, is the epitome of that quote from the movie. It's not how hard, and I don't know it by heart, even though I love those movies, it's been so long. It's not how hard you get hit, it's how fast you get up and keep moving forward. It's something like that. I'm almost 90% sure that's the quote. But that is this football team. And yes, they're no underdog like 2017 by any stretch of the imagination. They dominated this year. They had a nearly flawless roster. That was perfect. They destroyed everybody. They beat so many good teams along the way. They rolled through the playoffs despite having a really tough path when it comes to what opposing quarterbacks that they played. Jordan Love, Matt Stafford, Jaden Daniels, Pat Mahomes. Like, this team, I'm not trying to say they're an underdog and overcame odds this year of being counted out. But when you look at what they had to overcome, the trauma and the experiences they've gone through of the last 2 years, that is where they're the Phoenix rising through the ashes. That's where they got knocked down and got back up. The heat they felt after that Tampa Bay loss this year. It's one of the most impressive things that you'll see in football is how the Philadelphia Eagles won a Super Bowl in this era of 2020, you could say, 2021 to 2024. And it's so impressive, and it was all celebrated today. Down on the Rocky Steps, that feels pretty fitting to me. It feels pretty fitting. And none of this would have happened if Howie Roseman didn't sign Saquon Barkley. I'm willing to say it right now on the podcast. I think the signing of Howie Roseman, bringing in Saquon Barkley, is the greatest free agent signing he has ever made. over some other big ones. And I'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. This episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. And there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature. It keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three. I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is so easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. You're going to get that cash right away. Right now, new FanDuel customers, you can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, I'm willing to say it. I think, and there are so many great moves that Howie Roseman has made in his career as the Eagles general manager. And I'm not combining draft picks in this and trades, because then it would take me a little bit to rank all those moves that Howie's made, because it's resulted in 2 championships over the last 8 years. And, we could have a whole show about that. When it comes to just in a vacuum, what's the greatest free agent signing of all time in his career? I believe it's Saquon Barkley. After the season Saquon had this year. And before the show was going back and forth, I'm like, is it better than the Nick Foles signing in 2017? Because you do not get to the Super Bowl that year. You don't win your first ever championship where you outduel Tom Brady, who threw for 500 yards in that game. You don't do that without Nick Foles, right? And so I'm not taking anything away from that. To me, it's 1A, 1B with Nick Foles and Saquon Barkley. Those 2 signings in free agency. And they weren't even seen as massive signings at the time. Obviously, Saquon was big, but I don't think people thought this is the championship move, right? Those 2 moves are the most important, and they were the 2 biggest reasons you won 2 championships. Again, like I said, in under a decade. But even with the impact Foles made that year, and again, you don't have that first ring without him. I don't have that ring sitting on my desk without him. I think you can say the same for Saquon Barkley, right? He was the main reason this team went from, again, being on the verge of collapsing to a Super Bowl champion. You can say he's the main reason you won a championship like Nick Foles. And unlike the Nick Foles signing, bringing in Saquon, I think, saved an era of Eagles football. This core, it was on the line after what happened last year. I've said on the show before, but if they're 2-2 this year, and they have Miles Sanders or DeAndre Swift, or heck, even the running backs of the Foles era, Jay Ajayi, LeGarrette Blount, Corey Clement, Darren Sproles. Are they turning this season around? Maybe. Do they make the playoffs? Probably still. Do they turn around the way they did, fully committing to the run game and winning a Super Bowl because of it? Jalen Hurts was the best player you had in the NFC Championship in the Super Bowl. You ultimately, at the end, won because of your quarterback, and that's the way it always pans out, right? But Saquon's the one that got you there. He was the one that got you there, just like Nick Foles was. And I think it saved what is now seen as the golden era of Eagles football, because without Saquon Barkley, if they're 2-2 and they still stick to that, pass-heavy approach after the bye week, and they're still struggling and they're up and down, and let's say they still make the playoffs and they don't completely collapse like 2023, but they lose in the first or second round without Saquon. Does Nick Sirianni get fired? Do they move on? I think they might. I'm not going to say anything about Jalen Hurts because now I'm a full believer and I think, he's the franchise quarterback, but this could be a completely different story. The Eagles, with Nick Foles and Carson Wentz, they were never going to be a dynasty. That was one of the oldest teams in the NFL, and they were going all in on that 2 to 3 year window they had. But this current core, now we're talking about a real sustainable contender that I hate using the dynasty word because they only have 1 ring, but if there was ever a chance the Eagles were going to become that, if they ever had a chance in their franchise's history to become what the Patriots did, what the Chiefs have been, it's now. It's this era. This window is blown wide open with the youth and the talent they have. And without Saquon Barkley, I don't know if that is still the case. Like, I don't know if that is a possibility, that this team is now talking about winning more championships and potentially being a dynasty. They might be going through some real change this offseason. I don't know that for sure. They got to a Super Bowl 2 years ago without Saquon, but he's the main player that won you a championship, and there's so many guys you can give credit to, but if there was one guy you can say was the number one reason of so many, who was it? It's Saquon Barkley. And he saved an era of Eagles football that now has an opportunity to potentially be the next dynasty of the NFL, or at least consistently compete for Super Bowls year after year after year, unlike the Eagles have ever seen in their franchise's history, even over those consistent teams of the early 2000s. Like, this is another level. And that's why I think Saquon Barkley is the greatest free agent signing that Howie Roseman has ever had. And you could maybe say in Eagles history. It's close. It's up there. I mean, it's not a crazy take. Saquon Barkley had the most rushing yards a running back has ever had in a single season in NFL history when you combine the regular season and the playoffs. He broke Terrell Davis's record. Like, this is the single greatest season a running back has ever had. And in 2024, it led to a championship, which, again, I think is just so cool considering what the state of this position has been for the last decade. And it's been at an all-time low from a value perspective over the last few years. The fact that Howie Roseman finally paid this position, he timed it so perfectly where he finally made the choice to pay a running back a 3-year contract in free agency, a veteran, not even just like a 24-year-old, a 27-year-old. And it ends up resulting in a Super Bowl against a dynasty, and it's the best running back season we've ever seen in this league's history. It's an incredible story. And we know about the explosive plays with Saquon. We know about the clutch fourth quarter performances this year. But the leadership, too, is something. That's another reason this free agent signing is so incredible and historic. Because, we know the on-field impact of what he did. But I don't know if there's ever been a player that's come in year one, had the voice, the leadership, the veteran presence that Saquon Barkley did from the jump. Like, Malcolm Jenkins is up there, and there's a lot of guys you can, that have come in and instantly made, like, their presence known. But, like, Saquon Barkley, I don't know if it's ever been like this, where, I'm watching that mic'd up segment of Super Bowl 59, and he's the guy that's keeping this team even-keeled the entire game. Like, he's one of the vocal leaders, the main vocal leader of this football team. And I know he's one of the guys that's mic'd up, but it's so apparent what kind of leadership role he has, not just for the running back room when he's running out there to celebrate Will Shipley's first career touchdown. He's trying to get the ball back for it was Johnny Wilson, I believe, against Dallas. It's Saquon and Grant Calcaterra scores his first career touchdown, and Saquon makes sure he goes to celebrate with him in the end zone and gets the football. Like, this guy, even today at the parade, the ball boy didn't get a spot on one of the buses on the floats. Saquon notices him. He literally picks him up like a baby over the fence and carries him out with him to celebrate. Like, he just gets it. He's such a good dude, and he's a historically great player. It's just one of the best signings in NFL history. Howie, I can't believe how well this worked out. And the fact that he was a New York Giant before this makes it an even crazier story. I think Saquon Barkley is the greatest free agent signing Howie Roseman has ever had. And what a way to celebrate it today at the parade. What were the best moments from the parade today? I think number one had to do with Brandon Graham, and I'll get into why coming up as we wrap up this Friday edition of Locked On Eagles. Locked On Eagles is brought to you by PrizePicks. Football season, it may be over, sad, but basketball is in full swing, and there's no better way to stay in the game than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With PrizePicks, you pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. This week, I'm looking at LeBron James for more than 29 points. The best part, PrizePicks is quick and easy. You can set up your lineup in less than 60 seconds, and their fast and secure withdrawals mean I get my winnings in as little as 15 minutes. Plus, I love their weekly promos like Taco Tuesday, where your discounted player projections for even better value. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. Run your game. All right, so the parade has concluded down on Broad Street, Center City, Philadelphia, at the Art Museum. And what a day it was. An electric atmosphere. Over, 1 million people were down there. I'm kind of glad I didn't go, if I'm being honest, though. I enjoyed watching it from my TV. I had my fix of crowds on Sunday being in Broad Street in Center City, Philadelphia. I got the party out of me. Also was down in New Orleans covering the Super Bowl all week at Radio Row. I'm shot. I need a vacation, but it was so cool to watch you guys all celebrate down there if you were there on TV. And there's so many great moments, like Quinyon Mitchell being obliterated. I mean, he was hilarious. I've never seen such a reserved yet unhinged person in my entire life. Reed Blankenship starting the Dreams and Nightmares chant, or all the fans starting a Coop chant to Reed, and he's like, I'm Reed. Like, they thought he was Cooper DeJean. They mixed up the exciting whites. Howie Roseman got beamed in the head with a beer can, cut him right in the forehead. If he starts making weird moves now, we blame that person. Whoever threw that beer at Howie, if he drafts a linebacker in the first round, you know that something's wrong. And I'll blame the beer can. A.J. Brown coming for receipts in his speech. It was just, Landon Dickerson, as I predicted, had the best speech in my opinion. It was a perfect day. But the best moment of the day, and this is why I love sports so much, had to do with Brandon Graham ending the parade with a speech. And he's got on one side the Lombardi Trophy from Super Bowl 52. On the other side, he's got the Lombardi Trophy from Super Bowl 59. And it all was recapped right there. It all just all the memories came flooding back in that moment watching BG talk to 1 million Eagles fans. It's why I love sports, because again, Brandon Graham is in year 15. Nobody in franchise history has worn this jersey more than Brandon Graham. He gets hurt in a Super Bowl season, the game that he had maybe the best performance of his career. It was one of the best games he's ever had against the Rams on Sunday Night Football. And he falls with the tricep injury. Seems like he's going to miss out on this run. And for him to come back just in, that can't be the way his career ends. And then he comes back just in the nick of time. His tricep heals enough where he can play in the Super Bowl. And for him to then be able to be a part of beating the second best quarterback of all time, he's now beaten the best and the second best, and to dethrone another dynasty, to go out on top like that, and then to see that speech, and he's standing in between the two Lombardis. He's helped so much build those teams and win those titles. It was incredible. It was hard to not be emotional. It's, again, why I love sports. It's one of the coolest stories that you'll see in this league's history and in all of sports. And again, it all just came back to me, all the memories, because Brandon Graham's been with me, at least, as a coherent Eagles fan from the start. When he was drafted in 2010, I was 13. So yeah, obviously, there were some years before that where I was really into this football team. But when I was really coherent and the memories started really sticking with me, and I'm paying close attention to the draft and free agency and watching every single game, that was really when I was a teenager. That's really when I dove all the way into this sport, right? And Brandon Graham was with me the entire way. He was a part of every single era of Eagles football that I grew up loving or hating, whether it was the Andy Reid, Michael Vick era, then the Chip Kelly era, which again I could not stand, then the Doug Peterson era, winning the first Super Bowl, the ups and downs of that core, and then being a part of the Nick Sirianni era, winning another championship, getting to 3 of them in his career. BG has played with 4 head coaches. I mean, how many quarterbacks? Michael Vick, Kevin Kolb, Sam Bradford, Nick Foles, Carson Wentz, Jalen Hurts. The list goes on and on. It's just so cool that he got to end this the way he did. Not just going out on top, but to be on the field. And I actually think I rewatched that game the other day. BG made some plays against the run. He got to Patrick Mahomes with a couple pressures, basically with one arm. And for him to give the final speech today was so cool. And for them to get that second Lombardi and put it right next to him, that was amazing. That's why I love sports. Again, year 15. And you think it's going to end in heartbreak for him. He gets injured, maybe a career-ending injury because of the longevity that was left in a Super Bowl season, in a career night, and he comes back just in time to play in the Super Bowl. And to end it today like he did with the parade, if he's not coming back, I still think he's got game left if he wants to, but I think this is too perfect of an ending. And I think he needs to retire. I think he's going to want to end it like this. Year 15 is perfect, for my OCD brain too. Year 15 is so smooth to go out like that, a decade and a half, winning 2 titles, beating the 2 best players in NFL history, getting to be a huge part of that. That was my favorite part of the parade today. But there were so many cool moments. I mean, Landon Dickerson swearing on TV and A.J. Brown catching the 1 beer can. Saquon, like I said, grabbing the ball boy and lifting him up. Nolan Smith not knowing where he was, pretty much kidnapping a kid, putting him on his shoulders and walking down the street. It was an electric atmosphere. And did anybody have a Jason Kelce-like speech? No. But there were a lot of cool moments. And it was a special day. I hope if you guys are listening and you were watching and you were down there, that you enjoyed that. Because it's, I don't want to say once in a lifetime because it's been twice now in under a decade, but you never know when you're going to get it again. So I hope those memories last forever, and I think they will, for the players, for the fans, for the coaches, for everybody, for the family, everybody. And thanks if you're tuning in after that right here on Locked On Eagles. We appreciate you making us your first listen each and every day. Until next week, though, I'm Louie DiBiase signing off. Thanks as always for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.